YEW today. Now, if you missed the first two segments of our conversation about writing and literature and reading and listening and all of those things that he broke out, make sure that you check that out. I'll link to those videos here as well. But today, Andrew, we're going to be talking about grammar because you guys also were awarded Homeschool Family Favorites honors for your grammar program. So congratulations for that. And why don't you tell us just a little bit about the importance of grammar and why we should teach it, or if obviously we should, but why, and how does that factor into all of these other elements that we've already talked about?
Yeah, it's so funny because if you had asked me once upon a time, do you like grammar? I would say no, it's just kind of a hassle, especially teaching it in the homeschool world. But in the last, particularly 15 years, I have come to have a deep, deep appreciation for the importance of grammar. And I actually have a talk. It's a conference talk called But What About Grammar? And I didn't do any conferences this year, so it's online. It's somewhere, I don't know. But when we think about grammar, the best thing to do is realize it is the first of the 7 liberal arts. It is the key to everything. Without a foundation of grammar, and I use that with the capital G, the big idea of grammar, everything else becomes impossible. Some of you out there are familiar with the idea of the 7 liberal arts, the quadrivium and the trivium. And, this has got kind of a lot of interest in the homeschool world with groups like Classical Conversations and other classical curriculum co-ops and even hybrid schools. Why grammar? Well, when you look at the trivium, grammar is basically makes logic possible. If you don't have a subject and a predicate, you can't have a premise. If you don't have a premise, you can't have a syllogism. So you cannot actually think well about anything unless you know the grammar of it, which is what are those things called and what are the rules that govern their behavior. And this is true whether you're talking about music and music theory, or motorcycle maintenance, or writing. You can't make any progress in something until you know the basic stuff. What are those things called? What do they do? And then you can start learning the logic of the whole, right? How do they fit together? And then once you have the grammar and the logic of something and you have a pretty good grasp of it, then you're able to use your logic in a more rhetorical way to argue effectively, to argue for the discovery of truth, not just the argue for the sake of argue, but the art of rhetoric should be the pursuit of truth. That's how we got St. Augustine, right? Who wrote his Confessions and City of God and all these important, seminal Christian works in the early days of Christianity. What happened was he questioned, am I doing good by arguing to win? Or am I needing to change my whole concept of what is good? And so, when we teach the trivium, grammar, logic, rhetoric, we want to teach the whole purpose of this is to pursue the truth. And it starts with the truth about what things mean. And then with grammar, logic, rhetoric, and then you add to it the quadrivium, the skills, the mathematical or quantitative skills of arithmetic, geometry, music, and astronomy, then you get both areas fully developed. And the end result is how to think. That's why, the liberal arts and the great books are the curriculum of leaders throughout all of history. But it all starts with grammar. And I never would have kind of come to this position if I hadn't had this greater, more, I don't know, almost a spiritual realization. What is the first verse in John 1:1? In the beginning was the Word, the Logos. In Greek, that word logos has a huge connotation. The ordering principle of all things. That's where we get, biology, right? And
Right.
we get the word logic, right? It's the word and the logic and the incarnation of God as man and the speaking of the word and the word that speaks things into existence. It's all just so mind blowing. And yet you get back to, okay, where do we start? Well, we need to know what's the subject of the sentence. There is a fantastic book. If I were doing a convention talk, I'd hold it up right now because I carry it with me. Tiny little book. We don't sell it. You see, you have to get it elsewhere. Unfortunately, not cheap, but I love this book. It's called The War Against Grammar.
Hmm.
The War Against Grammar by David Mulroy. And Mulroy was a professor of classics at the University of Wisconsin for many years. And he discovered over his, couple decades tenure there that his students were decreasingly able, increasingly unable to understand just the literal meaning of what they were reading. And these weren't stupid students who were taking a dumbhead English class. These were people who signed up to read classics.
Right.
And so he tried several experiments, among them the most humorous. He gave them the Declaration of Independence, the first sentence, which we will concede is 72 words long. But he basically said, bonus points on a quiz, extra credit points. Two questions. Number one, do you recognize this? Number two, in your own words, what does it mean? And he tried this again and again and again and found that in no class ever were there more than about 25 to 30% of the students who either knew where it came from or had any idea, could even articulate remotely the meaning of the sentence. And so he wondered, why? Why don't they get it? And what he came up with is that students increasingly over 20 years were not taught explicitly grammar in school. And so he discovered this war against the teaching of grammar that has been going on for 30, probably almost 50 years, led by no less than the National Council of Teachers of English. Now we've reached a point where there is a significant number of linguistics people who hold the position that teaching grammar is racist. That even defining what is correct or incorrect in the use of language is fundamentally wrong because it marginalizes anyone who does something that anyone else could say is incorrect. So we move into complete relativism.
Right.
Complete relativism linguistically. That's the direction we're going. Although, there's impediments because the professional world, legal world does not like ambiguity.
Yes.
Although sometimes people get away with it. Notable examples is when the president under oath says something like, that depends on the meaning of the word.
I knew you were going to go there.
Or more recently, when the Speaker of the House says something like, we have to pass the law so we can find out what's in it.
Yes.
That was the Obamacare statement from
Right.
Speaker Pelosi. And you're just like, hold on. Why are these people not being held accountable for the non-grammatical precision of their statements? And I'll have to paraphrase here because I didn't memorize this, but I would read it if I had it handy. But basically, Confucius, who lived around the same time as Plato, and the two, were ancient pagans seeking wisdom and virtue. What is the meaning of life? And articulating some very interesting eternal truths in the same way at approximately the same time on opposite ends of the world. But Confucius said it very, very clearly. He said, accuracy in language is everything. Because if language deteriorates, then art and morals will deteriorate. And if art and morals deteriorate, justice goes astray. And when justice goes astray, people stand about in helpless confusion. Therefore, precision of language is above all important. Isn't that interesting? And what
Very.
do we see? Art and morals and justice go astray, meaning what does that mean? No longer tethered to the goodness, truth, and beauty that is the person of the creator, right? And then everything becomes relative. The meaning of words becomes relative. Now the meaning of whole statements becomes relative. Now the meaning of laws becomes relative. And then everyone is defining their own reality. So that's my short version of why grammar. The way we came up to our grammar program, which by the way is called Fix It, FIX-IT. You can look at this easily at IEW.com/FIX, or that link I gave you last time, IEW.com/free-lessons, and get 3 weeks of Fix It lessons completely free, download, print it out. So here's the short little story. Many years ago, it was recommended to me by a school teacher, a book called Grammar with a Giggle. And so I bought this book, and I loved the idea because it was teaching grammar at the point of need. And this is a huge thing for me. My teacher, Dr. Suzuki, in the world of music education, teaching violin, and then Mrs. Ingham, one of the Canadians I met when I first got involved with the blended sound site, both of them would always say, you must teach at the point of need. That's where relevancy is high. And you know this as well as I do. You try to teach something to someone who has no use, no interest, no application. They might pretend to learn it, but real learning is not likely to happen.
Right.
When you have a need or an application or an engagement, it's so much easier. So anyway, this book idea, Grammar with the Giggle, involved teachers. It was written for classroom teachers to read their students' papers and find out what mistakes the students were making or what goofy things they were doing. And then the teacher would write up a little story using the errors or the goofy things or the punctuation mistakes or whatever in this little thing. And then the teacher who wrote the book was saying, now, if you can make it funny, use the children's names in the story. And then what you can do is you can teach grammar in this enjoyable way, exactly what they need to know when they need to know it, because that's what they're doing in their composition right now. So I love this idea, and I tried it out, and I had some great times, and I sold the book for a few years, along with, there's a couple other in the series, Grammar with a Giggle, but I got 2 pushbacks on the book. Pushback number 1, it clearly was written for a very secular public school audience.
Okay.
And I'm the kind of person who can read anything, glean what's good, and not be irritated at things that I don't agree with or that are flat out wrong. Okay, that person, is misguided, but that doesn't mean everything they offer is wrong. But I would get people saying, how can you sell this book? It's just so worldly, or it's okay. So that was one thing. But the real problem is I discovered homeschool moms are actually very busy. They don't have time to sit around and write up little compositions with embedded errors that are, going to be a story that goes on and entertains their children, and they got 4 kids. No.
Right.
So I got the idea many years ago, let's write the stories. Then we can use good stories, and we don't have this public school, worldliness affecting the people who are trying to do this. We can create the thing so that they can just put it on the board. They don't have to write it. They just copy it. The kids see the errors, they copy it over, fix the errors. And that's where we got the name Fix It, because that's essentially what they're doing is fixing. They're working on the applied grammar. So if you think about grammar, there's divisions. Inherent grammar, I talked about previously, building up the syntax, database, vocabulary, through environmental reads, reading out loud to kids. That's by far the most important. But then there's applied grammar, right? I see that. Can I make it right? And then there's analytical grammar, which is when you get into a deeper level study of all the possibilities of what are those things called and what can they do and all their various weird combinations. The best way to learn analytical grammar, in my opinion, is study a foreign language. You know, you meet so many people said, I never really understood English grammar till I took German in college.
Right.
That's when it made sense. And so, you know, I'm very much in favor of kids learning a foreign language, preferably something like Latin that has a well-developed and clear grammar map. And they'll learn more English grammar from studying Latin for 4 or 5 years than they ever would from studying English grammar for 4 or 5 years. But you want the application. So that's where in the middle zone here with the fix it. So there's inherent, there's analytical, but we're working in this middle zone with applied grammar. And so what we did, we came up with one book that had like 5 stories and was going to last you for 5 years. But it didn't have much help. It was kind of assuming that every mom knew everything they needed to know to do this. And of course, as you know, a lot of moms are coming into homeschooling confessing, I don't think I got a very good education. I don't think I know this well enough to teach it. I'm not really sure about parts of speech. But they're humble enough to say, I want to learn so that my child can have a better education than I got. And that's why I'm homeschooling. That's why I'm choosing this alternative. So what we did then in the next round is we separated out the stories and added a whole lot of explanation and teacher prep. And so now we have a student book and a teacher book. The student gets 1 or 2 sentences a day. There's a little checklist at the top. We love checklists, as you know, of the things they're supposed to find, right? And so they check, okay, I'm going to look for an end mark. Does this have a proper end mark? Is there a period or something at the end of the sentence? Okay, find it. If it's not there, put it in. Check it off, okay? I'm looking for incomplete sentence. Okay, is there any incomplete sentence? Check it off. And then we added also identifying the parts of speech, but we don't dump all of them on the student in the first lesson. This is a super gradual, easy +1 approach to adding the complexity. So when you start with our Fix It Book 1 nose tree, there's like 1 thing to find in the sentence. And then by, a little later in the book, there's maybe 2, a little later in the book, there's maybe 3, but it's still pretty reasonable. By the end of book 6 of our Fix It grammar course, if you could do that, you would know more English, more analytically technical mechanics and grammar than I would say 99.9999999% of all English speaking people on earth. I mean, you would know more than almost every English teacher because it goes that far. It goes that far. Now, how much grammar do you need? That's a question, and we'll finish kind of with that because a lot of parents will say, well, how much grammar do you need? Well, it's kind of like how much math do you need? It depends on what you're going to do in life. Now we say, okay, well, to get into college, you need up through, algebra 2, trigonometry, whatever. But you're not necessarily going to use algebra 2 and trigonometry. So you need it because there's this construct that somehow it's going to be good for you. And we believe that enough that we keep making people do it as a requirement to enter college. We don't have a corresponding idea for grammar. So it's not as easy to say that. But, I kind of point out, if you believe your student knows kind of as much or more as you do, you've probably reached the point where that student will be as or more successful than you will be in using grammar in daily life. They may or may not need it. But it's also kind of like money in the bank. The more about something you learn, the better off you are, and you reap, dividends on that investment your whole life. And knowing stuff is fun. I mean, it's actually fun to be able to parse a complex sentence. But you can't dump it on students all at once. That's why the gradual E+1 method is best. So we have right now 6 levels of Fix-It grammar. We recommend level 1, probably around 4th grade.
Okay.
A very, very apt 9-year-old who is pretty solid in reading and likes language stuff. But around 4th grade. And then, like I said, if you can do Fix-It 6, by the time you're in 10th or 11th grade, you know more grammar than anyone you're ever going to meet in your life. So you're good to go. And don't forget Latin or a foreign language.
Awesome. Well, Andrew, thank you so much for joining us. I think actually through all of the conversation that we've had today, one of the things that stood out to me the most is for a guy who does love checklists so much, and you give us so many checklists to use in your curriculum, you actually have taken these elements away from kind of a homeschooling checklist to giving us insight into the big why of all of them. And so it's been a fascinating time to spend with you. And I'm so grateful for you taking that. Again, congratulations on all of your homeschool family favorite nods. And thank you again just for joining us today.
My pleasure, and keep up the great work there on your end. I think this will be super interesting to many, many people.
Thank you so much. And for the rest of you who have joined us today, thank you. I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I look forward to seeing you the next time on Homeschool Family Favorite Spotlight.